So we can share the recording later with those who are late or those who can't show up, and that's fine. That's the way it works with webinars often.
Yeah.
Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just share a little bit. So I am not unlike you all in terms of recently being registered. So I got registered October 4th, so just a couple weeks ago. And the reason, sort of the impetus for this webinar is a little story, I guess, about my experience. Like I said, I was registered October 4th, and what I did in terms of getting set up was that before I got registered, not much to do while I was waiting, got my Facebook page and my business page set up. And as soon as I got registered, it launched. And as I invited people, one of the things that I had already posted on my Facebook page, because David is in the rent to own area, was a post about rent to own. And so 3 days later, I can read the text. I got a text from a friend, WhatsApp message from a friend saying, "Hey, Anuja, you're in real estate." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Actually, I've been trying to help out my sister who is having trouble because she has a little bit of issue with her credit. And can you help?" And so what had happened is he had seen the post because he had been invited to my Facebook business page, had seen the post about David's company, David's Rent to Own, this organization, had read about it, and as a result, reached out to me. And, what has happened since is that I've had some calls with his sister, and we've gone through a couple of steps, and it does end up that his sister is actually a good candidate for rent to own, and David will get into details about that. But we've had a couple of calls, and what I've learned through the process, I know a bit about rent to own, and there's a couple of things I've done from the realtor end. And what that is really, I've explained sort of the basics of rent to own to her and given her, what is rent to own? How does the process work? I had to temper her expectations. The first thing she said to me is, "I want to get a home in Milton of this size and whatever." And, we're talking about $1 million homes when we first talked. And like we always have to do with clients, is sort of temper those expectations of what the market looks like. And so had that conversation with her. The next thing I really did was just did a bit of a pre-qualification, and David will get into those details as he shares the details in his presentation. But I went through the pre-qualification process, and she checked off that box. And next, what I did is set her up in a conversation with David. And David got in again into more details about explaining what rent to own is for her. And she again has passed that test, and we have moved on now. And so we are now at the stage where she is going to be properly qualified with the mortgage broker. And so as long as all that goes well, we're now in the process of that. I hopefully, again, if all that goes well, now just having been registered for a couple of weeks because of rent to own, hopefully, again, if that goes well, we'll have my first buyer client. And so that is a client that I would not have if it weren't for rent to own, because she's not in a position because of her credit history to buy outright today, but through rent to own could own in a few years. And so that story is a really highlights, I think, as a new realtor, without the client base that, my colleagues already have, really, I think for me at least, highlights why rent to own is something that I'm focusing on right now and why it might be a good option for new realtors. So I'll turn it over to David to get into details, but I wanted to share that story because I think it's really pertinent to us as we're trying to build our client base, because hopefully at some point her credit will be better and better, and she will also share with people in similar situations and hopefully refer me if all goes well, and I can help some other people get into home ownership. So I'll turn it over to David for details, and that's it for me. So thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Anuja. So we have a small group here, which to your benefit means stop me at any time, ask questions, don't feel shy. Although we have a fourth one just about to join here. say hi to this person once they're on. So yeah, I'm going to bring some slides here, and I will share these slides after the presentation. So I mean, feel free to take notes, but I will send you this deck afterwards, so you've got it. Are you guys able to see my screen? Hi, Gupta. Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining. All right, so we'll get started. Oops, I got someone else, I think, who just, another one coming in. So, yeah, so what I want to cover in our time together today is I'm going to provide a bit of an overview on what RTO is. RTO is a bit misunderstood. Some people have heard of it, some haven't. It's fairly simple when we break it down to you, but there are lots of questions and there's a few nuances. And the explanation I'm going to give to you in today's presentation is going to be realtor focused. So I'll be giving you the perspectives of the tenant buyer, the investor, and ourselves, the operator. But really my focus is to make sure you've got a perspective as a realtor. And so I'm trying to tailor my comments and tailor kind of how we educate you on this based on, I think, what you need to know as a new realtor. So we're going to go over what the model is, who RTO is designed for, how it can benefit your credit challenged clients. What are the nuances for a realtor? So how does this differ from a standard home purchase and from your process, from commission, all that stuff? And why the model of rent to own is fair for everybody. RTO, I would say, is one of those agreements or arrangements where it's an everyone wins type of situation because people are willing to take trade-offs. It's not a situation where you're trying to maximize profit as an investor or maximize this. It's a situation where we are enabling someone to move into their dream home, someone who's credit challenged, and it's an opportunity for all those people to get what they're looking for. The investor, the realtor, the tenant buyer, and the operator. So I'll go through that in more detail, but that's really the perspective. This isn't we're trying to milk or maximize the amount of profit we can make across all facets. This is really more of we all agree this is the right thing to do for this family or for this couple or for this individual who wants to buy a home, and here's how we're going to collectively do it, and there's a model to do that. So that's what we're going to get into. And so the reason I say I kind of say win-win is because it truly is a win-win model. Now, from your perspective as a new realtor, when Anuja, as I mentioned, Anuja just got registered, got her license, and the conversation we have is, how are you going to find that first person, or how are you going to find your first clients? And it's a challenge, right? Because there are a lot of realtors out there. Every quarter, there are new realtors entering the market. There are established realtors that you guys are trying to, you're going to have to compete with somehow. So it's not easy. It's not easy to establish a book of business when you're just starting. So if you are doing the same thing as everyone else, meaning you're helping someone buy a home, and this is a person who's got 20% down payment, may have worked with a realtor in the past, it's hard to penetrate. It's hard to win them over when they may have a history with somebody else. And so one of the ways RTO can be very interesting for a new realtor is that it allows you to tap into a different audience. And it's an audience that may not even know that they're eligible to buy a home because there's a bit of there's a process for them to go from renter to home purchaser. Now, I will go into that in much more detail. But really, that's kind of the critical point here is that RTO is something that's not really done by a lot of realtors today. I think if you polled 100 realtors, 20 of them could spell RTO, and 5 of them have maybe are really familiar with it, and maybe 2 have done an RTO deal. So it's a differentiator, and I think that's kind of a key point here. What effectively we're doing is this tenant buyer, this person who's renting today that we're going to be able to place in a home, you're helping them secure financing when the traditional banks say no. So there's a way, again, we do this, and I'll explain the details, but they're a motivated home buyer, but they're not able to buy today because they have their credit is not ideal or their down payment's too small. We are able to still secure financing for them, and I'll explain how. And so you're giving them an option. You're solving a problem that they have not been able to solve before. As a realtor, your job, what you love to do, is find your buyer a home they want to live in. That remains the same. You're still taking the buyer out to open houses. You're taking them to you're sending them listings. That entire thing, what you've been trained to do, why you've gone into the business, that's all the same. And these are people that typically were renters. If you help a renter find a new place to rent, you're going to get rental commission, which could be 1 month's rent. In this situation, you're helping a renter now get into home ownership. And upfront, it's a normal home purchase. So from your perspective as a realtor, it's standard buying home commission, standard buying purchase commission. It's the typical 2.5%. Or whatever you kind of deal you structure, but it's that standard purchase commission. So you're all of a sudden an audience or a renter that typically was only ever going to be potentially rental commission for you now becomes the potential of home purchase commission. So let's get into a bit more of the definitions here. So who and what's involved in this, right? So rent to own is a program that has four key people or stakeholders. So tenant buyers, and everything is they're the central piece. Nothing works without the tenant buyer. The tenant buyer are people who are unable to own a home today because they can't get traditional financing. They want to move into their dream home now. So they would love to be able to actually move into their dream home, and they want to earn their way into home ownership. They cannot get a mortgage today, but they will in 3 years' time. And who's going to kind of bridge that gap for those first 3 years? It'll be the investors. An investor is basically a money partner that's going to purchase the home today that the tenant buyer wants to live in. So the RTO investor will buy this home, their name will be on title, they will be on the mortgage, and they're agreeing to sell this home to the tenant buyer at a predetermined price in 3 years' time. And usually that price is anywhere between 12 to 15% higher. There's a kind of a formula of how we figure that out. But let's assume a home today is $600,000. In 3 years' time, if we kind of tack on 15%, the investor is buying today at 600K and agreeing to sell that home in 3 years at 690, which is 15% premium. As a tenant buyer, I'm interested, let's say, in a 600K home. And I can't buy it today because I don't have the credit and I don't have enough down payment. And I'm absolutely terrified at what a 600K home today, and let's say Cambridge, Ontario, might be worth in 3 years' time. Given the continued immigration coming into Ontario, the lack of supply, and just the rates that the way the rates have gone up already, 600K home today could be worth 700, 800, 850. We don't know. The nice thing about this is there's certainty. It's a predetermined price today that we're going to sell the home to you in 3 years' time. Now the realtor, where we get you guys involved? Here, you're working with this tenant buyer to find their dream home. And once they find that dream home, that they've identified the home they want to buy, as I mentioned, the investor is the one who's purchasing the home. So you're then doing the paperwork, you're doing kind of like the inspection with the investor. But I'll go through sort of how the work is different, but really that's your role, is you work with the tenant buyer up front, the same way you typically would in terms sending them listings, taking them to see places. Once they identify a place, you're then working with the investor to put forth the offer and to close the deal. And then the operator, and that's what my role is. So we basically connect sort of all the people together and sort of manage those relationships, manage all the contracts. Our job is to minimize risk. So my partner and I, what we do is we've got policies and processes to minimize risk. Our job is to make sure any deals we do work their way to the end of 3 years and that the tenant buyer gets their home. So we're looking for what could go wrong and putting processes or mitigation strategies in place so things go smoothly. And we manage basically all aspects of the deal over the 3 years. So those are the four key individuals involved or people involved. But at the essence of what RTO is a tenant buyer not able to buy a home today. They want to buy a home today. They have some down payment, but it's not enough. Their credit is somewhat damaged. They just need time to repair their credit, and they need time to grow their down payment. RTO basically gives them that time in the sense of 3 years, can be 4 years, but typical RTO is 3 years, where they move into the home that they want to live in today. They're renting it, but it's owned by an investor who's part of our group. And then that investor has agreed to sell the home at a predetermined price to the tenant buyer in 3 years' time. So we know exactly how much down payment the tenant buyer is going to need in 3 years. We know exactly kind of what sort of mortgage they're going to qualify for. So there's certainty across the deal. And it's up to the tenant buyer to kind of stick to the plan that we'll put together for them, such that they have the down payment, their credit is in good shape, and then they can buy the house outright in 3 years' time. So I'll pause there from a definition standpoint. We have a relatively small group. Any questions so far? Okay. Let me move forward here. So actually, let me go to this slide first. I mentioned credit issues. So if we think about the reasons that a tenant buyer might have credit issues, there's common ones where that could damage them. The most common one, especially in Ontario, is new immigrant, right? So there's a lot of people moving to Ontario. They're coming here and they don't have any credit history within Canada. So it's very challenging for them if they don't have a lot of cash to get a mortgage. So that's probably the most common profile of someone who doesn't have sufficient credit to get a typical grade A mortgage. Divorce is another common reason. So a couple gets divorced, and often both sides have their credit damaged due to missed payments, or all of a sudden their ratios are kind of knocked off. That is a very common situation. Temporary job loss. So someone had job loss for 6 months, got behind on some bills, their credit score got whacked, and they're trying to work their way back up. So those are the most common ones.
Hey, David, Joanne's got a question there.
Oh, sorry, I didn't notice the chat. Yes, go ahead, Joanne.
So I just wanted to go back to the descriptions there, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And you said that in terms of the investors part, so the tenants, they get to live in the home, and what proportion of rent are they paying? Are they paying regular market rate rent, or it determined by, like, who is this determined by?
Sure. Yeah. So there's two components that they're paying, and I'll get into more details, but to give you kind of the quick answer, they are paying standard market rent for the area that they're living in that sort of house location, that size. So standard market rent, and that goes to the investor. Then there's an additional portion called an option credit. And that option credit is basically forced savings. So each month they're paying this additional amount. Let's assume that the market rent was $2,000. They're going to pay an additional amount of about 25%, which in this case would be $500. That $500 goes to the investor sort of in the short term, but it accumulates towards the tenant buyer's down payment. So another way to think about it is, let's assume the tenant buyer had $20,000 short for down payment today. That's not enough to get them the home they want, but they have 20K today. Let's assume they're paying $500 per month for 3 years. That's 36 months. 500 times 36 is 18,000. So at the end of 3 years, they're going to have their original 20K plus the 18 that they've saved. And so now their down payment has grown to 38K. So to answer your question, the market rent is standard, but they have to be able to afford this additional buyer credit. But that buyer credit is 100% belongs to them. It just accumulates, and it's forced savings towards their down payment.
Okay, one more thing then. So everybody agrees to sell in 3 years' time, and it's a predetermined price.
Yep.
So you realize that right now the market is very crazy. Like every year it's going up by 20-30% easy.
Yep.
Is that counted in for because we can't predict the future and we don't know when it's going to drop. But is this 15% kind of like the standard, or?
So the 15% is over 3 years, which actually works out to about 5% per year, right? So using the example I had of 600K. So 600K times 5% is 30K. And let's assume we're just gonna add 30K a year for 3 years to 690. I'm kind of rounding here and I'm not doing compound interest. Let's just assume 690. As you said, the market's been nuts, right? I think you were in Richmond Hill, right? So it's crazy. It's quite legitimate. It's quite possible that a 600K home in 3 years could be 900. We've agreed at 690, and if the price is 850 in 3 years' time, still 690. But the reason the investor is willing to still do this is they're making sufficient profit from their investment that they're okay with it. We work with the investors and we explain to them, look, here is what could happen. You're capping upside. If you did a standard buy and hold, you might make way more money due to appreciation, or we may have a bit of a drop off and you've got that risk. The reason the investor is willing to accept that trade-off and willing to cap their upside is because this is a very hands-off purchase for them. They don't need to manage the tenant. They don't need to even visit the house. There's very little work from their part. They don't have to deal with sort of, hey, plumbing's broken, what do I do now? They don't have to go in and sort of turn the heat on, turn the heat off, all that stuff. All of that sort of maintenance, all the typical headaches, and I'm a landlord as well, so I have these headaches sometimes. All those headaches are not part of the equation. They're simply money investors, and in 3 years' time, they get a really good return. So they're fine that, hey, I don't have to lift a finger and I get that return. I'm good with making just this much money, and if this helps a family get into their house, so be it. They're willing to cap their upside because of those reasons.
Okay. So there hasn't been a case where the investor said, okay, we're going to terminate this contract because, it's gone up significantly and I don't want to sell it to the tenant anymore.
No, because they're contractually obligated.
Okay.
So up front, there is an option so there's the standard purchase agreement, which is just buying the house. That's the standard agreement there. Then we have the standard rental agreement. The additional contract is called the option of purchase contract. That's where it stipulates all of the terms in terms of what's the price we're going to sell the house for, and what are the things that the tenant buyer need to do in order to sort of maintain their good standing and not breach the contract.
Right.
And as long as the tenant buyer, and it's pretty cut and dry what they need to do. The investor cannot, it would be a breach of their contract. We wouldn't work with them if that was the approach, and we educate them sort of very strongly. No, this is the price, and if the market goes up, the market goes up, but you're still making this profit at whatever the market's at, and the market is the profit that they make is way better than typical mutual funds or ETFs, things like that. So that's why they're willing to do it.
Okay.
Joanne, I will say your comment was a good one in terms of the potential breach of contract. And I will say that not all rent-to-owns are created equal. And so David and I have done a lot of research on different rent-to-own models and how different operators approach. And we have heard instances where the price is variable or it does change. That's not the case in our model. So it's very transparent. It's very upfront in terms of the expectations on both parties. And as David kind of mentioned at the start, our goal is a win-win-win for everyone. And the way that works is people are accepting of different trade-offs. The investor might be accepting a capped appreciation, but the reason they do that is because there's less work and effort on their part. So there's a natural give and take in terms of a trade-off. And so that's one of the reasons why we believe that this model is very attractive and can be successful for everybody to be successful.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
So actually, Joanne, one thing, because I didn't think about that, Maninder, you're right. We got exposed. So Maninder and I got started, our origin story, we got started as investors in RTO. So we are on the investor side for a house. In fact, this is a house that Maninder and I own. And as an investor, it's been a really awesome experience because we literally have never we haven't had to do anything. We've been to this house once when we bought it for the inspection because we wanted to make sure we were buying a good house that didn't have any sort of plumbing damage, roof was intact, all that stuff. Since then, we have not had to do a thing aside from literally like each month log in to deposit the checks. The operator, so the operator in this particular case has sort of emailed us what we need to know, but there's been no stress and we're perfectly happy with the experience. And so what we're trying to do is now replicate this experience for our network and improve it to some degree. So the operators we worked with were like stand-up, sort of high integrity people. Melinda and I discovered later on, there are some shady characters in RTO where they do screw the tenant buyer and they will take their down payments. So good question, be aware of that. RTO, when done well, is a win-win-win, but there are, unfortunately, if you Google them, there are instances where the tenant buyer has gone screwed by rather unscrupulous operators.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I kind of talked about the credit issues. Let's talk a little bit about who's the profile for the client and kind of what's a good fit here. So first of all, it's price point. Seeking a home of between 400K and 800K. There's a couple of reasons that we don't go over $1 million. And one of it is CMHC in terms of what you can get from them at that price. So Joanne, in Richmond Hill, obviously the average price I'm going to guess is 1.2 or something, depending on the size of homes. So this model doesn't work great in Mississauga, Toronto, Richmond, like the kind of the core GTA areas, because the house price is too expensive. And the ratio of purchase price to rent means the homes won't cash flow. So we only focus on areas on the outskirts where cash flow is, rental cash flow is possible. So we look at Kitchener, Welland, Whitby, Simcoe, like those types of areas is where this makes more sense. There may be exceptions where you can find something that works, but it's really hard. So the cash flow thing is kind of a sort of a critical threshold for what we do. The investors we work with don't want to sort of feed it every month. They want cash flow. So that's critical. Joanne, go ahead. You have a question?
Yes. So you mentioned that it's between 400K and 800K, and obviously we won't find anything in this area.
Yep.
But we are able to find condos. Now, is that a different story because there's condo management involved?
So it depends whether if we throw in the condo fees, the math still works in terms of making cash flow. So that's kind of
with the condo corporation itself.
No, it's not really to the corporation. Like there's no restriction there. It's more about the numbers.
Okay.
Because as far as the condo corporation is concerned, like this is not an Airbnb or anything like that.
Right.
It's someone's buying the place and someone's renting the place, and that's standard fare for a condo.
Mm-hmm.
It's not transient or Airbnb, as I said. So yeah, there's no, it's really more of a do the numbers work out.
Mm-hmm.
Down payment. So as I mentioned, it's not that they have no money down, it's they have a small down payment. So today they typically only have 3 to 5% of the current purchase price. They have no criminal history, they're not in bankruptcy, there's nothing in collections. Household income is at least 25% of their desired purchase price. So this is a pretty big threshold. RTO is not for every renter, right? We're not trying to solve the housing crisis for every renter out there, but there is a decent segment of people that have good paying jobs, but they're behind on credit. They just haven't saved enough yet and can't get the mortgage that they want. That's who we're trying to solve for. So again, going back to our example of $600,000, the combined household income would be 150 or close to 150. We can go down a couple percent, that's fine. But the reason this number is so high is we want to be confident that they're able to close the deal in 3 years' time. If someone's going to try and buy a home at 600K and their income is 75K, the reality is they're not going to be able to do it. They're not going to make it to the end, and then they have a risk of sort of bailing on the deal and they lose a portion of their credits, and that's just not good for anybody. So we have a pretty high threshold of who qualifies up front, because whoever gets into the program, we want them to succeed. So that the bar is high. And again, we're not trying to solve this for everybody. We're trying to solve for those who do qualify. And it's typically couples or individuals with higher incomes that just want to get into the housing market before the prices escape them. This next point here is what I talked about earlier. So in addition to market rent, they can contribute generally close to 25% of the rent towards savings. This is the monthly option credit I mentioned. So this accumulates to their down payment they're going to use in 3 years' time to buy the house. So like I said, it's 2 payments they make every month. One is standard rent, and then one is the additional amount that actually does belong to them. And the last thing is we're looking for someone committed to staying in the house for 3 years, right? We're not, at the end of the day, if they leave after 2 years, then we have to sell the house, and it just kind of triggers a bunch of transactions and things we have to do. We want to avoid that. So we're looking for people who want to buy a home, want to stay in this home for 3 years. They're committed, they want to buy, and they can sort of fulfill all these other criteria. So we've kind of got a summary sheet, and I've got a sort of a realtor kit. I can email you all these details, but this is the general profile. And so going back to here, a lot of new immigrants may fit this profile. So if you think about new immigrants who come to Canada, they're working in IT or they're working in certain jobs where the incomes are quite good, they may fit this. They're willing now with kind of the fact that remote working is so much more common. They're comfortable living sort of on the outskirts to some degree. They've got some money saved up. They can make this additional rent. There's no criminal issues, and they're looking for a home for themselves or their family and want to stay there. So that's one way to think about the profile. Yep, Joanne, go ahead.
Well, I know you said it's 3+ years, so they'll be renting for the 3 years, and after the 3 years is up,
Yep.
They're going to buy it from the investors.
Correct.
What if once they buy the house, is it up to the now owners to decide if they're going to sell it or not? Because they could potentially have another, job offer, or they need to move out of the area for some reason, and sell the house. Now, is that a rule, or is it okay once they've transferred the ownership, that's the end?
Yeah, so once they own the home, it's their home, right? So
Okay.
let's assume
So there's no obligation after they own the home.
No, not at all. Yeah, there's no obligation whatsoever. Like the rope is sort of cut.
Right.
They own the home. They're free to make whatever decisions they want. And one thing they could do is, we talked about buying the house for $690. If the house is worth $850, they can put it back on the market right away and make the additional equity.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to move into here, the RTO process. I'm just going to blow this up a little bit so you guys can see this. Give me 1 sec here. So there's a process here from the qualifying. So the tenant buyer qualifying stage, investor, buy the house and close. And then year 1 to 3 starts here. And then this is where the house kind of transfer towards the end. You'll notice in red the word realtor. Your job starts at the beginning and really ends once the house is purchased. So not at the end of 3 years, but up front. Once that investor buys the home, you get your full buying commission. And that's it. Your job is done for at least that portion of the deal. So in terms of what you're doing here, if you identify a potential tenant buyer, you make the introduction to us and we'll qualify them. And so we've got a mortgage broker that has a ton of RTO experience and sort of knows kind of what the bar should be. So let's assume he qualifies your tenant buyer. He'll kind of request a bunch of information, and we have a list of like all the different documents he looks for. Once they submit all those documents, he'll kind of run the numbers. And if they don't qualify, he'll let them know, and he'll let them know why. If they do qualify, he'll let them know. But more importantly, he'll put together a plan for the next 3 years of what they need to do to be in a good spot to buy the home in 3 years. And then every 6 months, he checks in with them to make sure they're on plan. So it's pretty hands-on from our end to make sure your tenant buyer is going to be successful. So that's part of what we do as an operator, is we coordinate all those things. And so once they are qualified, you do your job in terms of beginning the house search. So sending them listings, taking them for open houses, getting them sort of familiar with the area and identifying where they want to live. While this process is going on, we're identifying the investor who's going to buy this house. And so we've got a pool of investors that are interested in doing this with, depending on location, depending on house price. So we will then sort of select the investor who we think is the right fit, and we'll introduce them to you. More for just literally so you guys know who each other are. And the investor is kind of making sure they get their funds and financing together and everything is confirmed. Now let's get to the fun part. You guys, so the tenant buyer and yourselves find the house that you guys like, that the tenant buyer wants to move into. The investor and yourselves submit the conditional offer. The reason it's a conditional offer, and I know that's kind of tough in a really sort of fast moving market, but it has to be conditional because we need to do a home inspection. This model, or this does not work if we sort of shotgun quickly buy a home and hope that everything is working. Because if there's all these unexpected expenses, the model breaks down, right? No one's happy about that. So we're willing to let some deals go away, but we 100% insist on conditional offers so that we can get a proper home inspection. The investor is comfortable with the purchase of this home. And once that happens, things move quickly and we do the paperwork and sign the deal. But it has to be a conditional offer and conditional upon inspection. So we do the inspection, the deal is confirmed, conditions waived, the investor closes, tenant buyer moves into their home, and we're kind of good to go, right? So this is kind of the purchase is done, all the paperwork's done, the investor got the mortgage, the investor is on title, tenant buyer has moved in, and you've received your purchase commission. Then moving forwards, it's from the tenant buyer perspective, we're basically collecting rent, we're collecting the option credits, we're distributing it to the investor. We check in on the tenant buyer quarterly. So we will actually, someone from our team will physically go to the house every 3 months to make sure there's no grow up, there's nothing sort of unsavory like that. And that also the tenant buyer is just sort of comfortable, everything is in good shape. And I mentioned every 6 months, the mortgage broker we have, Craig, does a check-in with the tenant buyer to make sure they're on track. A few months before the deal closes, before the end of the 3 years, we sort of do this kind of confirmation that they're still able to qualify for the mortgage. Assuming that's the case, the tenant buyer exercises their option to purchase. So it's that contract I mentioned called the option to purchase. They're exercising that option and the paperwork is done to transfer ownership. And in the last month, title's transferred, the investor mortgage is discharged, all the payments are sort of given to the investor and to ourselves, the operators. Deal's done, tenant buyer has complete control because now they have the home in their name. So this is the general process. The majority of the realtor work is upfront here. And most of it's kind of standard work, but there are some nuances. So I will get into those nuances now here. Joanne, go ahead. You have a question? Oh, sorry, I thought I saw your hand raised.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. So what happens despite all the checks that the mortgage agent does and everything, but they fail to approve for the mortgage?
So then it depends why. So we have a whole section on risks that we'll get into, but let me kind of address it now. If they're unable to qualify for the mortgage, even if they've stuck to the plan and they can't qualify for the mortgage, then we would kind of find a way, we would try and find, okay, do we extend the deal for a year, give them another year to sort of contribute more to their down payment, raise their credit score a bit more, and see if that's going to work. So if they can't qualify, I'll say for good reasons, like they haven't damaged the house, they haven't damaged their credit, they stuck to the plan, they did everything they were supposed to do, and the Canadian, the banks have sort of changed some rules that's sort of out of their control, then we would try and find some solutions where the tenant buyer doesn't lose anything. We would extend the deal or come up with a solution like that. if the tenant buyer cannot qualify because they missed payments, they didn't pay rent, they did something they shouldn't have done, they didn't communicate, and they missed rent, didn't communicate, just were not responsible tenants, then the contract stipulates that they are at risk of losing up to 90% of their buyer credits, which is a big chunk. Now, we have zero interest in confiscating 90% of their buyer credits. The reason that's in the contract is so that the tenant buyer realizes they have serious skin in the game. It basically, it makes it very serious. And it's no different than what would happen if they defaulted on their mortgage to a bank, right? So what we want to make sure is the tenant buyer understands this is a similar structure to working with a bank. It's an alternative arrangement, but the commitment to making your payments and to communicating well and to taking care of your house is exactly the same. And if you don't do that, you are at risk of losing some of your money. So the contract stipulates that, but it's up to kind of the investor and ourselves to figure out what is the appropriate treatment for this tenant buyer based on the situation.
So what happens if the tenant all of a sudden lost his job?
Yeah, so that happens, and again, extending the deal is a potential option. So if there's a good likelihood they're going to find a new job and they're just going to miss a couple months of rent, then we might be able to extend the deal for a year and adjust some payments. If they're likely not going to find a job, or there's just serious challenges, we may have to end the deal, and we'll find a way to return a portion of their buyer credits to them. We deal with that on a case-by-case basis, to be honest. So again, we're not trying to screw anyone over. Like, if they lost their job, they lost their job, right? Like, if it's out of their control and they've been a good tenant, then we don't want to sort of set them back financially. So I can't give you a hard number, but it'd be sort of dealt on sort of what kind of tenant they've been.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the nuances from a regular buy and hold or a regular kind of home purchase. So it is a bit of a longer process, right? There's more steps for you because there's the parties involved, and of course, it's really the introduction of the investor. Now, all these steps happen, or sorry, the more time-consuming steps, the qualification of the tenant buyer, mortgage qualification, they happen prior to looking at potential homes. So this is important because we don't want you wasting time showing a bunch of homes to someone who ultimately can't buy, who can't qualify for our program, right? So the reason we qualify them up front is so that, hey, we're comfortable with them. Here is the budget they qualify for. Go work with your realtor and go find some homes that you like. So while it's a longer process and there's more steps, you as a realtor don't have to be involved in many of those steps. A lot of those things are things that we're taking care of. The offer must be conditional. So I mentioned this, right? It's a frothy market, still needs to be conditional just because we don't want any risk of big issues in the house. We want to be able to acknowledge any issues that might need any attention or any money. And the investor is ultimately buying the house, they need to be comfortable. The involvement of the investor. So ultimately, they're the ones who are signing the documents. You're working with them on the offers, on the purchase. So that's a bit of a nuance. And there is a maximum budget. So Craig, our mortgage broker, is going to tell the tenant buyer, here's what you can afford. So do not look for a home more than this. If your threshold is 600, that is the threshold, and you are not allowed to go to 610 for your offer. So that's a bit of a nuance as well. Now, again, but these aren't crazy nuances. I think you can manage around these. And I think most importantly, what's the same is everything else is really the same. And as I mentioned, you're getting full commission upon closing, and like the upfront closing here of the purchase, rather than placing the tenant buyer into a rental and getting the 1 month's rent, you're getting standard purchase commission here. Here's an example that we've got. So family of 5, they're in their early 40s, 3 kids, they've been long-term renters, and they want to live in Cambridge. They have saved $35,000 for their down payment, and they've been qualified for a home of $700K. So they have 5% down payment, but they can't get secure financing due to credit. They've been approved for a monthly budget of 4,000, 3,200, which would be the market rent, and then the 800 for the option credit. So that's the situation. They've got a good household income of 180. They're both working. Credit scores here you can see are kind of on the low side, and that's their big challenge. So the quick synopsis of the stats is the value today of the home that they're qualified for is 700. Using, I think it's 4.5% in this particular case, the investor is agreeing to sell the home to them for 798, 816 in 3 years. The down payment today that they have is 35K. The down payment they're going to have in 3 years is this number because of the 35K today plus 800 option credit per month times 36 months. So they basically raised their savings by 28.8 over those 3 years. So that's the quick math. Now let's do a comparison of today versus what 3 years from now looks like. So the home price today is 700K. 3 years from now, we're selling it to them for 798. Now that's the actual. What market price is, who knows? It could be $1 million home in 3 years, we don't know, but this is the price they're getting the house for in 3 years' time. Their down payment today, or their initial option, is 35K. In 3 years' time, it's the 63.8. They've been paying 800 a month in option credits, so they've saved this much. So today they have 5% of their home price. In 3 years' time, they're going to have 8%. And so their CMHC is going to be a lot easier to deal with. They'll be able to qualify. In the first 3 years, they're paying monthly rent of $3,200. When they buy the house, there's no rent. Of course, there's going to be property taxes and mortgage and all that stuff, but no rent. There's an $800 monthly option credit for the first 3 years each month. And of course, once they buy the house, there's no need for the credit anymore. The tenant buyer qualifies for a mortgage. Well, no, not today. They can't do it today, but in 3 years, they will have qualified. And they'll have a monthly mortgage payment in 3 years' time. Who's owner on title and mortgage? So it'll be the investor and ourselves, Rent to Grow Homes, for the first 3 years. That gets transferred to tenant buyer. They're living in their dream home the entire time. So the one nice thing about this also is your tenant buyer doesn't have to move a couple of times. They move once at the beginning and they stay there. And it just really paperwork at the end of 3 years. They don't have to move into a different home. Responsible for property tax, home insurance, kind of the usual things there. That's the investor and ourselves for the first 3 years. Then of course the tenant buyer inherits that. One nuance here, responsible for utilities, appliances, home maintenance, lawn, snow, all that stuff. Typically in a rental situation, the landlord owns that. The landlord takes care of that. With RTO, in the option of purchase contract, it stipulates the tenant buyer takes care of it. So they're responsible for those expenses, but they're responsible for the work as well. And a few reasons is, number one, it's the tenant buyer's house. So often they want to take care of their home. They can do whatever they want. They can paint it as they wish. There should be communication on some things, but generally it's their house. But that's also, this is simply kind of, again, part of the requirements for a good tenant buyer is they're willing to uphold those things, and it makes the numbers work. So this is a nuance where the tenant buyer is ultimately responsible for their home. So some of the risks, let me just check the time. We covered a lot of these risks already. So the big thing is we want the tenant buyers to know this is a serious contract, no different than if they worked with the bank. So if they cannot qualify for the mortgage, if they want an early out, if they want to leave because of job loss, someone's moving, or just on a whim, they want to leave, we have some options. One is they are at a risk of forfeiting their credits, but we would try and figure out how can we sort of mitigate against that, and are there better options such as extending the term, so extension of RTO, or are there other reasonable alternatives? So we would try and work with them, again, case by case, based on sort of their history as a good tenant. If they stop paying rent, if there's illicit activity such as grow ops or things like that, then we would take them to the landlord tenant board and sort of go through that process, which is a hassle for everyone involved. We have no interest in doing that, which is why we qualify very carefully up front. But again, we're serious about this. This is a business. These are contracts. So we want good tenants, and obviously we don't want them to stop paying rent, and we don't want anything illegal happening there. There are risk factors. If there's major repair required, then it's covered by the investor's homeowner insurance, but the deductible is paid by the tenant buyer. If there's minor repair needed, then that's responsibility of tenant, as I mentioned before. If property values stay flat or go down, which seems unlikely right now, but it could happen, it should be avoided if we're picking homes in the proper location and the appreciation factor is reasonable. But if the tenant buyer decides to bail after 3 years, they don't want to close it because the house prices went down or for whatever reason, again, we would try and find reasonable alternatives for them. This seems unlikely, but we want to make sure we think of it. So we would work with them on this. Joanne, you kind of brought up what happens if the values go beyond the expected appreciation. It's likely going to happen, and that's simply part of the win-win arrangement. We complete the deal, and everyone should be happy. So that's what we want to have happen. That's actually the ideal outcome. So why work with us? Our goal is to have 100% of deals reach conclusion. So we only work with tenant buyers that we think are going to be successful in 3 years. We're very, very careful with selection process. We have resources to keep the tenant buyer on track. So I mentioned the sort of meetings every 6 months to make with the mortgage side, credit coach, financial planning tools, all that stuff's available. We have resources for first-time homeowners. So it's like little toolkits or guides on sort of how to take care of your home. We offer a referral bonus. So if you bring in a qualified tenant buyer who sort of passes qualification, you would receive an upfront referral bonus of $500, plus of course the commission on the purchase. But upfront, you would get a little bonus for bringing a good qualified tenant buyer, and also a referral bonus for bringing in a qualified investor. So if you know people who might be willing to invest in something like this, we're also interested in talking to them and happy to pay you a referral bonus for that. From our side, we've got really strong process, strong contracts, all that stuff. So, and we manage everything every step of the way. And in terms of our team, I mentioned we have a network of investors. We've got kind of a mortgage specialist and credit repair specialist, lawyers, accountants. We work with some realtors, but we're actually trying to kind of grow our realtor network, which is why we conduct sessions like this. Ultimately, we're in this because we strongly believe in guiding deserving families onto the path of home ownership. Again, I've mentioned sort of in my earlier comments, I've done some investing before. We own sort of a couple of condos. We own a property where we have sort of standard sort of tenants. I truly fell in love with the idea of RTO because I love the idea of helping someone who's working hard, had a bit of a problem, but wants to own a home, and helping them get into that position. And I just think it's an awesome arrangement, and that's why we got into this business. So that's a bit about us. In terms of next steps, so I mentioned kind of the qualifying questions. So where are you looking to live? If you have sort of someone in mind who might be a tenant buyer that you think might be good potential, these are the 4 qualifying questions. So where are you looking to live? Purchase price that you're targeting? What is your total household income? And how much cash do you have available for a down payment? And sort of here are the desired responses. And if that's true, then yeah, feel free to reach out to us at info@rent2grow homes or our number here. You can just do a reply to sort of the emails I've sent over the course of today. And then we are trying to grow our realtor network. So as I mentioned, some of this doesn't really work great in Toronto or Mississauga or kind of places where the average home price is well over $1 million and the ratio of rent to home price is it cannot positively cash flow. So we are looking to, as a realtor, depending on the areas that you serve, if you're willing to serve and have expertise in serving areas slightly outside, that's very interesting to us because we want to have experts in towns where this works, right? So Whitby, Oshawa, Welland, St. Catharines, Kitchener, any expertise there or being able to kind of drive out there and take tenant buyers there is very interesting to us, right? Because that's where the purchases are going to happen. So we've set up a sort of a Google form for you to sort of input information. If you send, I'll put the link in the chat now and I can email it later afterwards. If you're interested in sort of being part of the network, there's no obligation whatsoever, but we're trying to kind of identify realtors who may be interested, may want to work with us, maybe realtors that we should be sending deals to. And we'll be sending emails probably once a month, once in a while, about sort of newsletter type of stuff. I'm going to share that link in the chat and I'll email it to you guys later. But that's another potential next step. So I think that really wraps it up. I know we're at time, around 8:03 right now. I'll kind of stop the slides here and kind of open the floor for any other questions. Kareem, I didn't say hi to you. I know you came a couple minutes after we'd started. Good to see you as well. Hopefully you enjoy this. Any other questions?
LP, go ahead.
Okay. Hi. As I'm living in Ottawa, if I get any client, can I reach out to you guys?
Yeah. So Ottawa is actually a market we're very interested in for a couple of reasons. One, the numbers work very nicely. Ottawa has gone up in price a fair bit in the last couple of years, but not to the extent that Toronto's at. So the model does work in Ottawa. I'm aware of some deals that have happened there within RTO. So yes, we are interested in Ottawa.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Joanne, go ahead. Dave, I'm
Oh,
not
sorry,
sure if you can
sorry,
see
I'm not used to
that.
seeing the hand thing. Yeah, go ahead, Joanne.
So when you mentioned 600K, does that include, so does the accountant calculate the factors for property tax and all that? Or closing fees?
Yeah, so like the initial closing fees and property taxes and property insurance for that matter, you know, is borne by the investor, so the investor partner. So when we're looking at a property for 600K today, basically Craig, our mortgage broker, our specialist who's done a number of RTOs, he looks at a number of factors. Basically, like he doesn't have a crystal ball, but you know, he's projecting and working out a plan and you know a detailed plan with the tenant buyer as to what is a reasonable budget that we can set, and in 3 years time will you be in a position to be able to handle a mortgage payment at, you know, and he uses a you know, the pressure test that CMHC would use. Would you be able to handle the property taxes, what they are today, and property insurance and all of those things 3 years from now? Today, let's work out, can you handle the rent and the buyer credits? And to be honest, if the answer to that question, the last question, is yes, your monthly load should actually, you know, carry you forward well for property taxes and things like that. So Craig's got a pretty intricate model on how he works with the tenant buyers, but yes, all of that is factored in.
Okay. And will these PowerPoint slides be available to us in case we want to use them with our clients to explain certain things?
Yeah, so we've got actually a couple of things that I'm going to make available to you. One is we have like a one-page summary. So very similar to the file that I sent earlier today, we have sort of a one-pager for tenant buyers that explain it. We will give these slides to you. We also have a couple of emails that you could use to reach out to people you might think might be interested. One is sort of a short form email to kind of get them interested. And one is a bit longer that gives a little more details. So it's kind of part of our Realtor kit. So I put a link in the chat here. This is the Google form I had mentioned. Joanne, if you're interested.
I'd say for everyone on the call, the most important thing to probably just keep in mind as you're talking to potential clients, like we'd be happy to talk to any of your investor friends who might be looking into this as an investment opportunity. But for your potential clients that could be tenant buyers, actual renters, or future homeowners, the key question to consider is, are they able to qualify for a mortgage today? And if the answer to that is yes, like how much, and does that kind of meet their standards or meet the budget that they're looking for, or you know, it's really not sufficient and they would actually need more. So that would be a potential, or the answer is just straight no. And if the answer to that is like, they need assistance with qualifying for a mortgage, let's have that initial chat. And let's determine if RTO is a good fit for them. We'd be happy to just kind of take them through the steps, provide some education, introduce them to Craig, and see if there's some opportunities there. If the answer to that question is, yeah, they could qualify for a mortgage, but it's a little tough, it's a little tight, chances are there are other alternatives with CMHC and whatnot that they could explore, which might be more beneficial to them. Again, RTO is not for everyone. And I would say RTO is a good, if not great, alternative for folks that can't qualify for a mortgage today. And operators like David and myself are acting as the bridge to them being able to secure that financing in the future. So that's the way I would kind of help to qualify whether or not you have a potential client that's a right fit for RTO. It's an answer to the question, can they qualify for a mortgage today?
Cool. LP, I see your name. Sorry, I see your hand raised again. Was it a different question?
No, I think it was the same one.
Same one? Okay.
No, not same question.
Yeah.
Same question? Okay, no problem.
Same answer. We're still looking to working on.
Yeah,
it. So happy to chat.
Ottawa's good by us. That has not changed.
Yeah, I think the hand did not raise
Yeah,
down.
no problem. We can probably lower that. That's fine. If there's nothing else, well, thank you very much all for joining. We're available for questions. If you've got our contact info, I will send the deck to all of you that attended. Yeah, if you could fill in that form, the Google Doc, it's literally 5 really simple questions. It'll take you probably 35 seconds to fill out. And yeah, if you've got interesting tenant buyers or investors, but probably more tenant buyers as you're kind of launching your real estate career, we'd be happy to support you and work with you. Thanks everyone for your time, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Yeah, thank you all.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I actually have another question if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you guys have a set standard of how much